The plane plummeted toward the icy Hudson River. Engines dead, 155 souls aboard. Captain Chesley Sullenberger had mere moments to make a decision that would define not just his career, but his entire life. As the frigid January air rushed past the disabled Airbus A320, one thought crystallized in his mind: this can't be how it ends. If you've ever wondered what true heroism looks like in the face of impossible odds, this story will show you. Before you continue watching, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible, true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. The morning of January 15th, 2009, began like any other for Captain Sullenberger. At 57, he was a veteran pilot with over 40 years of flying experience. His passengers that day, business people, tourists, families, boarded US Airways Flight 1549 at LaGuardia Airport, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. None could have imagined that their routine flight would become one of the most remarkable aviation events in history. Sully's life before that fateful day had been one of quiet dedication. Born in Denison, Texas, in 1951, he had fallen in love with flying at age 5 when he saw military jets soaring over his hometown. By 16, he was taking flying lessons in a crop duster, and at 20, he entered the United States Air Force Academy. His military career was distinguished but unassuming, much like the man himself. After leaving the Air Force, Sully joined US Airways in 1980. Colleagues knew him as meticulous, thoughtful, and unfailingly professional. His wife Lori often joked that he was a pilot's pilot, someone who studied aviation safety with almost scholarly devotion. This dedication would soon be tested in ways no simulator could prepare him for. Flight 1549 took off at 3:24 p.m., climbing steadily into the clear winter sky. First Officer Jeffrey Skiles was at the controls, with Sully monitoring the instruments. Just 100 seconds after takeoff, as the aircraft reached 2,800 feet, Sully noticed something alarming: a flock of large birds directly in their flight path. "Birds," he said calmly, seconds before impact. The sound was deafening. Thudding impacts followed by the sickening smell of burning feathers and flesh as Canada geese were sucked into both engines. The left engine immediately failed. The right sputtered, flamed, and then went silent. In that moment, US Airways Flight 1549 became a 70-ton glider. "My aircraft," Sully said, taking control from Skiles. What followed was a masterclass in crisis management. While most people would panic, Sully's voice on the cockpit recordings remained eerily calm. He quickly assessed their options: return to LaGuardia, divert to nearby Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, or attempt the unthinkable: land on the Hudson River. "We're going to be in the Hudson," he informed air traffic control in a voice so matter-of-fact it momentarily confused the controller. Inside the cabin, flight attendants began shouting their emergency commands. "Brace! Brace! Heads down! Stay down!" Passengers, sensing the gravity of the situation, fell silent. Some texted final messages to loved ones. Others prayed. A few simply stared out windows as Manhattan's skyline slid past at an alarming angle. Sully had to make the perfect water landing, something pilots train for but almost never execute. Too steep an approach, and the aircraft would break apart on impact. Too shallow, and it would skip across the water like a stone before tearing itself apart. The river itself presented dangers: boats, debris, and the bone-chilling January temperature of the water. With remarkable precision, Sully guided the powerless aircraft down, maintaining just the right descent rate and speed. At 3:31 p.m., just 208 seconds after the bird strike, Flight 1549 touched down on the Hudson River surface with a forceful but controlled impact. "Brace for impact," were his final words to the cabin before water began rushing in. What happened next was equally miraculous. As the aircraft settled into the river, passengers and crew evacuated with astonishing efficiency. Flight attendants deployed slides, which became rafts in the water. Nearby ferries and boats immediately changed course, racing toward the sinking aircraft. Within minutes, strangers became rescuers, pulling soaking wet passengers from the frigid river. Sully himself walked the flooding cabin twice, ensuring no one was left behind before finally evacuating. The image of passengers standing on the wings of the partially submerged aircraft, waiting calmly for rescue as it slowly sank into the Hudson, became iconic, a testament to human resilience and cooperation in crisis. All 155 people aboard survived. The media dubbed it the miracle on the Hudson, but Sully himself rejected the notion of divine intervention. It was not a miracle, he would later insist. It was decades of experience, training, and adherence to procedure. Yet for the passengers whose lives he saved, the distinction hardly mattered. In the days that followed, Sully found himself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. A naturally private person, he struggled with his sudden celebrity status. Interviews, talk shows, and a congratulatory call from President-elect Barack Obama pulled him from the ordered, disciplined life he had always known. But the aftermath wasn't all celebration. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, launched a standard investigation, questioning whether Sully had made the right decision. Computer simulations initially suggested he might have been able to return to LaGuardia safely. For a man who had built his identity around professional competence, these doubts were devastating. Lori Sullenberger noticed the change in her husband immediately. The confident, composed man she had married seemed suddenly uncertain, questioning a decision he had made in 208 seconds with incomplete information and 2 failed engines. He struggled with insomnia and found himself replaying those moments over and over, wondering if he could have done better. "I've had 40 years in the air, but in the end, I'm going to be judged on 208 seconds, he confided to her one night. The investigation continued for 15 months. During this time, Sully advocated tirelessly for his profession, highlighting the importance of experienced pilots, proper training, and fair compensation. He testified before Congress about declining working conditions in the airline industry and how they might affect safety. When the NTSB finally released its findings, they vindicated Sully completely. When human factors were properly accounted for, the time needed to assess the situation, communicate with air traffic control, and prepare for landing, the simulation showed that returning to any airport would have been impossible. Sully had made not just an acceptable choice, but the only choice that could have saved every life aboard. For the passengers of Flight 1549, life after the Hudson was complicated. Many experienced post-traumatic stress, startling at loud noises or becoming anxious during takeoff. Others found new purpose, making major life changes after their brush with mortality. Annual reunions became a tradition, with survivors gathering to celebrate their rebirth day and the bond they would always share. Donna Dent, a passenger who had been terrified of flying before that day, found her fear paradoxically cured. "After you survive something like that," she explained, "regular flights don't seem so scary anymore." Jim Whitaker, a business executive who had been focused solely on his career, quit his job 6 months after the crash to spend more time with his children. "When you think you have 3 minutes left to live, you get very clear about what matters," he said. For First Officer Jeffrey Skiles, the experience forged an unbreakable bond with Sully. Though they had met for the first time just 3 days before the flight, they became lifelong friends and advocates for aviation safety, often appearing together at events. Sully himself retired from commercial flying in 2010, after 30 years with US Airways. He channeled his unexpected fame into advocacy, writing books and giving speeches about crisis management, leadership, and the importance of preparation. His message was consistent. What happened on the Hudson wasn't a miracle, but the result of good training, clear communication, and teamwork. In aviation, as in life, he often said, "It's not what you know that's important, but how you use what you know." The story of Flight 1549 eventually became the subject of a major motion picture, simply titled Sully, directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Tom Hanks as the unassuming hero. The film explored not just the landing itself, but the investigation that followed and the toll it took on Sully's mental health. When asked about the film, The real Sully expressed satisfaction that it highlighted the contributions of everyone involved. His first officer, the flight attendants, the passengers who helped each other, the first responders, and the ferry crews who rushed to the rescue. It was never just about me, he insisted. 10 years after the Hudson landing, a journalist asked Sully if he ever thought about how differently things might have turned out. He paused before answering. Every day, he finally said, I'm grateful every day. The legacy of Flight 1549 extends far beyond one winter afternoon in New York. It changed aviation safety protocols, influenced bird strike prevention measures at airports worldwide, and reminded a cynical public that sometimes ordinary people can do extraordinary things when the moment demands it. Perhaps most importantly, it offered a powerful lesson about preparation meeting opportunity. Sully hadn't become a hero in 208 seconds. He had spent a lifetime becoming the kind of person who could remain calm and competent when everything went wrong. As we navigate our own challenges, rarely as dramatic as a forced water landing, but significant in our lives nonetheless, we can draw inspiration from Sully's example. The decisions we make in crisis are shaped by all the decisions we've made before. How seriously we take our responsibilities, how diligently we prepare, how we practice our skills when no one is watching. The true miracle of the Hudson wasn't that a plane landed on water without breaking apart. The miracle was that the right person, with the right experience and the right temperament, happened to be in the captain's seat when disaster struck. In a world that often seems chaotic and unpredictable, Sully's story reminds us that preparation matters, expertise matters, and character matters. Sometimes, they matter more than we can possibly imagine. As Captain Sullenberger himself put it, one way of looking at this might be that for 42 years, I've been making small, regular deposits in this bank of experience, education, and training. And on January 15th, the balance was sufficient so that I could make a very large withdrawal. What deposits are you making today that might save you, or others, tomorrow? The story of Flight 1549 continues to resonate years later, not just as an aviation miracle, but as a profound human story about grace under pressure. For the passengers who boarded that plane expecting a routine flight to Charlotte, life would forever be divided into before the Hudson and after. Beth McHugh, a 64-year-old grandmother traveling to visit her daughter that day, recalled the moment she realized they were going down. The flight attendant was saying, brace, brace, heads down, stay down, and I thought about my grandchildren who I might never see grow up. But then I felt this strange calm. The plane seemed to be gliding so smoothly, even though we were heading for water. When the impact came, it was violent but controlled. Water immediately began rushing into the cabin through seams and cracks in the fuselage. The temperature inside plummeted as frigid Hudson River water rose around passengers' ankles, then knees. Move toward the exits, flight attendants shouted, their training overriding any personal fear. Leave everything behind. Barry Leonard, seated in 1D, was one of the first to evacuate onto the left wing. The bitter January air hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside, his clothes already soaked. Within seconds, he was standing ankle-deep in icy water on the slowly sinking wing, wondering if hypothermia would claim him before rescue arrived. But rescue was already on the way. Captain Vincent Lombardi was piloting the ferry Thomas Jefferson when he saw the plane go down. Without hesitation, he diverted his course, radioing simply, "We got a plane in the water." His ferry was the first vessel to reach the scene. Pulling alongside the sinking aircraft's wings where shivering passengers stood in disbelief. "Jump!" ferry workers shouted, reaching out their arms. Some passengers hesitated, the gap between wing and boat seeming impossibly wide. Others leapt immediately, understanding that the alternative, remaining on the sinking plane, was far worse. Inside the rapidly flooding cabin, flight attendant Doreen Welsh found herself waist-deep in freezing water at the rear of the aircraft, which was sinking faster than the front. A passenger had panicked and opened the rear door prematurely, allowing water to rush in. Despite a serious leg injury sustained during impact, Welsh fought against the current to redirect passengers toward viable exits. "Go the other way," she screamed above the chaos. "This way is flooded. Go forward." Her actions saved countless lives, though she would later downplay her role. "I was just doing my job," she insisted in interviews. The real hero was Captain Sullenberger. As the last passengers evacuated, Sully performed his final walkthrough of the cabin, wading through ice-cold water that had risen to the seats. The aircraft was groaning, settling deeper into the river with each passing minute. Still, he methodically checked each row, ensuring no one was left behind, injured or unconscious. Only when he was absolutely certain the aircraft was empty did he finally evacuate himself, climbing out onto the wing where a rescue boat waited. By then, his uniform pants were soaked to the thighs with Hudson River water, and his feet had lost all feeling from the cold. On shore, first responders had mobilized with remarkable speed. Ambulances lined the riverfront, and medical personnel prepared to receive hypothermia victims. Survivors were wrapped in blankets, given dry clothes, and checked for injuries. Remarkably, there were few serious physical injuries, some bruises, cuts, and Doreen Welsh's leg wound being the worst of them. The psychological impact, however, would take longer to assess. Mark Hood, a businessman who had been focused on a presentation he was to give in Charlotte, found himself profoundly changed by the experience. "I was living on autopilot before the crash," he later said. "Working 60-hour weeks, missing my kids' soccer games, always chasing the next promotion. When you think you're about to die, you realize how much of your life you've been wasting." Within a month, Hood had resigned from his high-pressure corporate job and started a small consulting business that allowed him to work from home. "My wife says she got a whole new husband after the Hudson," he joked. "A better one." For others, the impact was less positive. Carl Johnson, a former Marine who prided himself on his emotional resilience, found himself struggling with unexpected anxiety and flashbacks. The sound of jet engines would send him into a cold sweat. He couldn't bring himself to fly again, which eventually cost him his job as a regional sales manager. "I never thought I'd be the one to fall apart," he admitted 2 years after the crash. "I've been in combat zones, for God's sake. But there was something about being trapped in that plane, feeling it fill with water. It broke something in me that I'm still trying to fix." Johnson eventually found help through therapy and a support group of Flight 1549 survivors who understood exactly what he had experienced. Slowly, he rebuilt his life, though he still travels exclusively by train or car. The investigation into the crash revealed just how remarkable Sully's water landing had been. The NTSB's detailed analysis showed that he had achieved a nearly perfect touchdown angle, keeping the aircraft level enough to prevent breaking apart while maintaining sufficient speed to ensure control until impact. "It was like threading a needle," one investigator commented. "A few degrees off in any direction, and we'd be talking about a tragedy instead of a miracle." The investigation also highlighted the critical role of the Airbus A320's design. The aircraft remained structurally intact upon impact, giving passengers and crew precious minutes to evacuate before it sank. This vindicated decades of aviation safety improvements that had often been criticized as expensive or unnecessary. For the airline industry, Flight 1549 became both a validation and a wake-up call. It validated the emphasis on rigorous training and emergency procedures that had prepared Sully and his crew to respond effectively. But it also highlighted vulnerabilities, particularly regarding bird strikes, which had been increasing in frequency as bird populations recovered and aircraft became quieter and harder for birds to detect. Airports across the country intensified their wildlife management programs, using everything from habitat modification to train border collies to reduce the risk of bird strikes. The FAA updated its bird strike database and made reporting mandatory rather than voluntary. Meanwhile, Sully found himself navigating an unexpected second career as a public figure. Initially uncomfortable with the attention, he gradually recognized the platform he had been given and chose to use it thoughtfully. Rather than simply accepting accolades, he advocated for his profession, warning about the dangers of reducing pilot training requirements or cutting corners on safety to increase profits. Aviation safety is written in blood, He often said in speeches, "Every rule, every procedure exists because someone somewhere died when that rule didn't exist. We forget that at our peril." His testimony before Congress was particularly powerful. Speaking with the quiet authority that had served him so well in the cockpit, he described how declining wages and working conditions in regional airlines were driving experienced pilots away from the profession. "The situation is urgent and requires immediate attention," he told lawmakers. "I do not know a single professional airline pilot who wants his or her children to follow in their footsteps." His advocacy helped lead to significant regulatory changes, including increased rest requirements for pilots and higher minimum experience levels for airline first officers. For Lori Sullenberger, watching her husband navigate fame was both gratifying and concerning. "The Sully who walked through our door that night was not the same man who had left that morning," she recalled. "He carried the weight of what had happened, both the responsibility and the scrutiny, very heavily." She described how he would wake in the night, replaying those 208 seconds in his mind, questioning each decision despite the successful outcome. "He's always been his own harshest critic," she said. Even after everyone else had called it a miracle, he was still asking himself if he could have done better. This perfectionism, while sometimes difficult to live with, was also what had made him such an exceptional pilot. Throughout his career, Sully had never been content with merely meeting standards. He had always pushed himself to exceed them, to understand systems more deeply, to prepare more thoroughly than required. His logbooks, meticulously maintained since his first flying lesson, revealed a pilot who treated every flight as an opportunity to learn and improve. He had logged over 20,000 flight hours before Flight 1549, each one a deposit in the bank of experience he would draw upon that January day. The passengers of Flight 1549 recognized this dedication. On the first anniversary of the landing, they gathered at a New York restaurant to celebrate their rebirth day. Sully and Lori attended, as did First Officer Skiles and the flight attendants. The evening was emotional, filled with tears and laughter as survivors shared how the experience had changed them. One passenger presented Sully with a handmade quilt, each square contributed by a different survivor or their family. Another had written a song about the experience, which he performed with trembling hands but a strong voice. Children who had been on the flight, now a year older, presented drawings of the plane in the water and the hero pilot who had saved them. Sully accepted these tributes with characteristic humility, repeatedly redirecting praise to his crew, the first responders, and the passengers themselves, who had evacuated calmly and helped one another. What happened on the Hudson was not just about one decision or one person, he told the gathered survivors. It was about all of us rising to meet a challenge together. That's the real miracle. Not that the plane didn't sink immediately, but that we all became our best selves when it mattered most. This theme of collective resilience became central to Sully's public speaking. Rather than focusing solely on his own actions, he emphasized how the successful outcome had depended on countless people doing their jobs well. From the engineers who designed the aircraft to withstand water impact, to the flight attendants who executed a textbook evacuation, to the ferry captains who responded without hesitation. Heroism isn't about one dramatic moment, he would say. It's about a lifetime of small choices that prepare you for that moment. It's about the culture we create together that values expertise, preparation, and putting others first. This message resonated far beyond aviation. Business leaders invited Sully to speak about crisis management and leadership. Schools asked him to address students about the importance of preparation and responsibility. His book, Highest Duty, became a bestseller not just because it recounted a dramatic event, but because it offered wisdom about how to live and work with integrity. 5 years after the Hudson landing, Sully finally retired from public speaking to focus on his family and personal interests. The media attention had gradually faded, allowing him to reclaim the privacy he valued. Yet his influence continued through the policies he had helped shape and the example he had set. For the aviation industry, the legacy of Flight 1549 was profound. The miracle on the Hudson had demonstrated that despite all the challenges facing commercial aviation, cost pressures, increasing automation, crowded airspace, the system still worked when it needed to. Pilots were still being trained effectively. Aircraft were still being built to withstand emergencies, and safety procedures were still saving lives. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was more personal, carried in the hearts and minds of 155 people who had faced death together and emerged transformed. Many reported a deeper appreciation for life, stronger connections with loved ones, and a clearer sense of purpose. Emma Cowan, who had been traveling to Charlotte for a job interview, decided to stay in New York after the crash. "Life is too short to chase the wrong things," she explained. "That job would have paid more, but it would have taken me away from my family and friends. The Hudson taught me what really matters." Dave Sanderson, who had helped other passengers evacuate before leaving the sinking plane himself, found a new calling as a motivational speaker, sharing lessons from the experience. "We all have our own personal Hudson moments," he would tell audiences. "Times when life tests us and reveals who we really are." For Sully himself, the most meaningful legacy was perhaps the simplest. 155 lives continued. Children grew up, marriages took place, careers unfolded, grandchildren were born, all because of 208 seconds of focused expertise over the Hudson River. At a quiet dinner celebrating the 10th anniversary of the landing, a passenger approached Sully with tears in her eyes. "My daughter got married last month," she told him. As her father walked her down the aisle, "I couldn't help thinking, this moment exists because of you. She was on the plane with me that day." Sully, typically reserved, found himself momentarily overcome. "That's the greatest gift," he replied softly, "to know that life goes on." And life did go on. Changed, certainly, but perhaps richer for having glimpsed its fragility. The Hudson River still flows past Manhattan, ferries still cross between New York and New Jersey, and planes still take off from LaGuardia every few minutes. But for 155 people and their families, that particular stretch of water will always represent something profound. The day they almost lost everything, and the man whose lifetime of preparation gave them a second chance. In a world that often seems to reward cutting corners and taking shortcuts, Sully's story stands as a powerful reminder that excellence matters, preparation matters, and doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, matters most of all. As we face our own challenges, both ordinary and extraordinary, we would do well to remember the lesson of Flight 1549, that the way we live every day shapes how we respond when crisis comes, that the small, consistent choices we make when stakes are low build the character and competence we draw upon when stakes are high, that sometimes the difference between disaster and deliverance comes down to 208 seconds of doing precisely what you've trained your whole life to do.